Picture this. You are driving down a two-lane highway at 11 o'clock at night. No streetlights, no moon. Just you, the asphalt, and whatever your headlights can reach. You lean forward, squinting through the windshield, gripping the wheel a little tighter. Something feels wrong. The road ahead looks like it is wrapped in fog, even though the sky is perfectly clear. It is not your eyes, and you are not imagining things. Your headlights are dying. Slowly, silently, and by design. Here is the part that should make you furious. Right now, in your bathroom cabinet, there is a combination of household products, costing less than $10 total, that can restore those dim, hazy headlights to factory clarity. Not slightly better. Completely restored. The American Automobile Association tested this approach in an accredited laboratory. Their conclusion? It works. Yet walk into any dealership with those same foggy headlights and they will quote you $300 to $800 per assembly for a replacement. For luxury vehicles, BMWs, Audis, Mercedes, that number can sail past $2,000 for a pair. Now think about that gap for a moment. A $10 fix versus a $400 repair. Nobody in the parts supply chain has a financial incentive to tell you about the cheap option. That is not a conspiracy, that is just how the business model works. Welcome to Historia Prime. We are the channel that digs up the lost survival skills, the forgotten mechanics, and the self-reliance of previous generations, so you can use them right now, today. In this video we are going deep. We are going to trace the engineering history of automotive lighting, break down the molecular chemistry of why your headlights decay, expose the viral hacks that actually make things worse, and then walk you through the exact method that professional detailers charge $150 for, using products you probably already own. By the end, you will not just know how to fix your headlights, you will understand why they were built to fail in the first place. And that knowledge is worth far more than the repair. Let's start at the beginning. Part 1. The Glass Age, when things were built to last. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to an era when car parts were built to outlive the car itself. From the 1940s through the late 1970s, for over 40 years, every car sold in America used standardized glass headlights called sealed beam lamps. Round or square, universal. If a rock shattered your headlight on the highway, you drove to the nearest gas station, spent about $5, and swapped the unit yourself in the parking lot. No appointment, no specialist, no proprietary part number. Glass was an extraordinary material for this job. It did not fog. It did not yellow. It did not degrade under sunlight. A glass headlight installed on a 1965 Mustang looked the same 20 years later. Optically stable, scratch-resistant, and essentially permanent. But think about that from a corporate boardroom perspective. When every car on the road uses the same $5 universal part, there is no recurring revenue. You cannot patent a unique shape for each model year. You cannot charge $200 for a custom-fitted assembly. And you certainly cannot force a customer back to the dealership for a part that only fits one specific vehicle on the planet. The glass age was a golden era for the consumer. For the automakers, it was a dead end. So they made a move. In 1981, Ford Motor Company filed a petition with the federal government to change the safety standard that had governed headlights for decades. Their public argument was aerodynamics and fuel efficiency. Glass was heavy, they said, and it limited the sleek, sweeping designs their engineers wanted to build. That part was true. By 1983, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 108 was amended. Automakers were free to replace glass with polycarbonate plastic. Now, let me be fair here. This was not purely corporate scheming. Polycarbonate is genuinely a better material in several important ways. It is 250 times more impact-resistant than glass, meaning in a collision, it will not send glass shards into a passenger's face. It weighs half as much, which helps fuel economy, and it can be molded into any aerodynamic shape a designer can dream up. The switch to polycarbonate was real engineering progress for crash safety. The problem was not the material itself. The problem was that polycarbonate had a fatal weakness, a molecular Achilles heel that nobody talked about on the showroom floor. Part 2. The Invisible Enemy. The Chemistry of Decay. Polycarbonate won the battle against impact and weight, but it was completely defenseless against something far more common than a highway rock: the sun. Here is what happens at the molecular level, and this is genuinely fascinating. Polycarbonate is chemically vulnerable to ultraviolet radiation. Every single day that your car sits in a parking lot, UV photons from the sun are striking the plastic surface of your headlights and triggering a destructive chemical process called photooxidation. Those UV rays carry enough energy to physically break apart the covalent bonds, the molecular chains, that hold the plastic together. Once those bonds snap, they create free radicals, which set off a chain reaction of decay throughout the material. Two things are happening simultaneously. First, short-wavelength UV radiation causes what chemists call the photo-Fries rearrangement. It breaks specific carbonate bonds and creates new chemical groups that absorb blue light. The result? Your headlight turns brown and yellow. In plain English, the sun is eating your headlights alive, and it is doing it molecule by molecule. Second, longer wavelength UV combined with oxygen in the air causes chain scission. The long, strong polymer molecules get chopped into smaller, weaker pieces. Micro cracks begin to spread across the surface, invisible to the naked eye, like hairline fractures in a windshield. Once those micro cracks open up, the environment pours in. Rain moisture, road salt, chemical residue from automatic car washes, airborne pollution, all of it seeps into the cracks and gets trapped. Then the heat from the headlight bulbs themselves causes the plastic to expand, drawing that contamination even deeper. The result is that cloudy, yellow, hazy lens you see on almost every car older than 5 or 6 years. Manufacturers know this happens. They have always known. That is why the factory applies a thin, UV protective coating to every new headlight, often just 25 microns thick. This sacrificial layer absorbs the UV damage so the plastic underneath can survive. But it is temporary. 3 to 5 years maybe, before the sun and road debris destroy it completely. After that coating fails, your polycarbonate headlight is naked, unprotected, decaying in your driveway while you sleep. And here is the critical part most people miss. The automakers adopted a material with a known expiration date and then built an entire replacement pipeline around the fact that it would inevitably fail. Whether that was the original intention or simply a convenient outcome is a question I will leave for you to answer. Part 3. The High Cost of Blindness. Now, if foggy headlights were just an ugly cosmetic problem, this would be a story about vanity. It is not. It is a story about safety, and the numbers are alarming. In 2018, the American Automobile Association published a landmark study. They tested the headlights from popular sedans that were roughly 11 years old with typical sun damage. The results? Those deteriorated, cloudy headlights produced only about 22% of the light output compared to new ones. Sit with that number for a second. That is not a 20% reduction. That is a 78% loss in the illumination that is supposed to keep you alive on dark roads. And it gets worse. The haze does not just block light, it scatters it. Instead of projecting a focused, sharp beam down the highway, the micro cracks in the yellowed plastic spray light in every direction. So you get terrible illumination ahead of you, while simultaneously blinding oncoming drivers with a wall of scattered glare. You are seeing less. They are seeing less. Everyone loses. Half of all traffic fatalities in the United States happen at night. The average vehicle age in America has hit a record high of over 12 years, according to S&P Global Mobility data. Do the rough math. There are hundreds of millions of polycarbonate headlights on American roads right now, and a huge percentage of them are operating at a fraction of their designed output. Every single one of those aging lenses is a potential $300 to $800 repair ticket. Multiply that across tens of millions of vehicles, and you start to see the scale of the replacement market that was created when the industry moved away from indestructible glass. That is not a conspiracy. That is arithmetic. Part 4. The false profits of restoration. Because dealership replacements are so expensive, desperate car owners have turned to the internet for cheap fixes. And this is where things get dangerous, because the internet is full of modern-day snake oil. Throughout history, whenever a widespread problem meets a knowledge gap, bad advice rushes in to fill the void. Before I show you the real science, we need to clear the minefield. First, the WD-40 illusion. You have probably seen the videos. Someone sprays WD-40 onto a yellow headlight, wipes it off, and the lens looks crystal clear. It looks like magic, but it is a trick of physics, not a repair. WD-40 is a water-displacing lubricant, not a plastic restorer. When you spray it on an oxidized lens, the oil fills in the microscopic pits and cracks on the surface. Because the oil has a refractive index similar to the plastic, it stops the light from scattering, and the lens temporarily looks clear. But the dead, oxidized plastic is still there. Zero UV protection has been added. The clarity lasts maybe a week or two, and then the oily residue left behind acts as a magnet for dust and grit, which scratches the surface even more. You have made the root problem worse. Second, and this one is genuinely alarming, bug spray. Specifically, mosquito repellent containing DEET. Yes, if you wipe DEET on a foggy headlight, the yellow haze comes off. But do you know why? Because DEET is a chemical solvent that literally melts polycarbonate plastic. You are not cleaning the lens, you are chemically burning the top layer off. This degrades the structural integrity of the plastic, making it brittle and prone to deep cracking that no amount of polishing can fix. And if that bug spray drips onto your car's paint, it will eat through the clear coat. Now you have a headlight problem and a $1,000 paint job to worry about. Household cleaners like Windex, oven spray, or acetone fall into the same trap. They either do nothing or they cause damage that goes far beyond the original problem. These viral hacks all rely on the same psychological lever, our desire for an instant, effortless fix. But chemistry does not care about your convenience. You cannot cheat it. What you can do is learn enough to master it. Part 5. How the Amish stayed immune. So how did the Amish escape this trap? The answer is disarmingly simple. They never bought into the premise that protecting your home requires purchasing a patented chemical. In Amish communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, lime is still applied to homes by hand, often by the community working together in a single day. No contractors, no synthetic products, no warranties with fine print expiration dates. Their approach goes beyond just lime washing walls. Traditional Amish sawmills process timber without chemical preservatives. Instead, they use what is sometimes called a wood soap finish, a mixture of slaked lime and natural fatty acids that creates an insoluble calcium soap deep within the wood grain. This gives their hardwood floors natural antimicrobial protection while allowing the wood to breathe. As a side effect, it produces that beautiful, soft, matte finish that high-end Scandinavian designers now charge a premium for. And perhaps most importantly, Amish builders have largely avoided paper-faced drywall altogether. Their walls are typically solid timber, stone, or lime plaster. When a mold spore drifts through the window of an Amish home, it lands on a surface with a pH of 12.4, finds zero organic material to feed on, and dies. End of story. Studies examining historic homes built with traditional lime-based methods have consistently found the same thing. Lime-treated surfaces show complete resistance to mold growth. The only sections that develop problems are areas that were later renovated using modern synthetic drywall. This pattern has been observed so consistently that the conclusion is hard to argue with, and yet it receives almost no attention in mainstream construction media. The Amish did not discover some mystical secret. They simply refused to abandon a solution that worked. And in doing so, they accidentally became a living case study in what the rest of us gave up. Part 6. Bringing the Secret Home. A Weekend Dye Guide. All right, you have been patient through the history, the chemistry, and the industry analysis. Now comes the part you have been waiting for. How do you actually use this ancient technique in your modern home? The good news is that a traditional lime wash is remarkably simple to prepare and apply. You can do this in a single weekend for the cost of a few cups of coffee. Here is how. First, a critical safety note. Calcium hydroxide is highly alkaline and caustic. You must wear protective gloves, a proper dust mask, and safety goggles throughout the entire mixing and application process. This is not optional. Lime can cause chemical burns to skin and eyes, and inhaling the powder can seriously irritate your lungs. If you have respiratory conditions, take extra precautions or consider having someone else do the application. Work in a well-ventilated area and keep children and pets away. Step 1. Materials. Buy hydrated lime, also labeled as calcium hydroxide or type S lime. This is important. Do not buy agricultural lime or garden lime. They are different products and will not work. You can find a 50-pound bag of hydrated lime at most masonry supply stores for roughly $8 to $15. You will also need a large bucket, a stirring stick, and a thick block brush with natural bristles. Step 2. The mix. Add 1 part hydrated lime to roughly 3 parts water. Always add the lime to the water, not the other way around, and stir constantly to avoid clumps. Keep stirring until the consistency looks like thin, watery milk. Then let it rest for a few minutes so the lime fully integrates. Step 3. Surface preparation. Lime wash bonds by soaking into porous surfaces. It works beautifully on raw brick, stone, concrete block, and unpainted plaster. If your basement walls are already coated in acrylic or latex paint, the lime wash will not grip. You will need to either strip the old paint or apply a specialized mineral-based primer first. Make sure the wall is clean and free of loose dust. Step 4. Application. Dip your block brush in the mix and apply it to the wall using loose, overlapping X-pattern strokes, not the straight, even strokes you would use with modern paint. This crisscross technique creates a beautiful, organic texture and ensures even coverage. Keep a wet edge as you work. If one section dries before you paint the one next to it, you will get harsh overlap lines. If the wall is very dry or porous, mist it lightly with water first to help the lime soak into the surface. Step 5. Patience and cure. When you first put it on, the lime wash will look translucent and splotchy. Do not panic, this is completely normal. As the wash dries and begins reacting with carbon dioxide in the air, it will turn opaque and lighten by 2 to 3 shades. Apply 3 thin coats for best results, waiting at least 24 hours between each coat. Start at the base of the wall where it meets the floor. That junction is where moisture attacks first. Once your final coat is done, leave it alone. Over the coming weeks and months, that chalky liquid will undergo carbonation. It will pull carbon dioxide from the air and slowly transform back into solid calcium carbonate, limestone. Press your fingernail into it after 6 months. It will feel like rock. You have just armored your house with a breathable, self-healing, mold-destroying shield. and you bypassed a $12 billion industry to do it. One honest caveat. If you have a severe existing mold infestation, especially with species like Stachybotrys or Aspergillus that pose immediate health risks, lime is not a substitute for professional remediation. Get the active infestation dealt with safely first. Then use lime to ensure it never comes back. That is where this technique truly shines. Permanent, ongoing prevention at a fraction of the cost of repeated chemical treatments. Conclusion. History is not just a collection of dates and dead kings. It is a treasure map. For the past century, we have been sold a vision of progress that means wrapping our lives in synthetic plastics, sealing our homes until they suffocate, and then spraying toxic chemicals to fight the very nature we locked inside. But the Amish, the Romans, and the builders of the ancient world knew something we forgot. You do not conquer nature by trapping it. You work with it. A simple, natural material derived from the earth, burned, slaked, and brushed onto a wall, created homes that breathe, that heal themselves, and that protect the generations living inside them. The next time you see a patch of mold creeping across your basement wall, or catch that familiar dampness in the air, remember this. Somewhere in Lancaster County, a farmhouse built before the Civil War is standing clean and dry, protected by nothing more than a recipe that fits on a single line. You do not have to be a victim of modern disposable architecture. The knowledge has been here all along, written in the walls of the past, waiting for you to reclaim it. Thank you for joining me on this journey into forgotten ingenuity. If this video changed the way you think about your home, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share it with someone who is fighting their own battle against dampness. Every share keeps a piece of buried knowledge alive. This is Historia Prime. Stay curious, stay resilient, and I will see you in the next chapter of history.